Picture this, May 17th, 1536. You're standing in the Tower of London. The walls are cold. The air smells of river water and rust. And in a cell barely wide enough to lie down in, a man sits on a wooden bench, hands bound in front of him. His name is George Boleyn, Lord Rochford, the king's brother-in-law, one of the most powerful men in England just 6 days ago. Now he's waiting to die. But here's what history books don't tell you. Death is not the worst thing they did to him. What happened in the days before his execution, the systematic psychological destruction, the calculated humiliation, the machine designed to break his mind before the axe touched his neck. That's the real horror. And by the end, you'll understand why George Boleyn walked to his death not as a nobleman, but as a ghost, a man who had already been erased. If you believe the darkest corners of Tudor history deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Your support helps uncover what the crown tried to bury. Now let's follow George Boleyn into the machine, May 2nd, 1536. 6 days before his execution, George Boleyn is arrested at Greenwich Palace. He's 32 years old, handsome, educated 2 years old, fluent in French and Latin, a poet, a diplomat, a member of the King's Privy Chamber. He's also the brother of Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, Henry VIII's second wife, the woman the king broke with Rome to marry. For 3 years, the Boleyns have been the most powerful family in England. They control court appointments, foreign policy, the entire machinery of royal patronage. George himself is untouchable, or so he thinks. The charges are read to him in the Great Hall. High treason, conspiracy to murder the king, and something else. Something so vile that even the courtiers assembled to witness the arrest go silent. Incest. George Boleyn is accused of committing incest with his own sister, with the Queen. The evidence? Testimony from a single person. His wife, Lady Rochford, Jane Parker, the woman he's been married to for 10 years. The woman who hates him, who has watched him charm every woman at court except her, who has endured his affairs, his neglect, his contempt. And now she's standing before the king's commissioners, repeating words she's been coached to say. I witnessed them together, in her chambers, behind closed doors, the way they looked at each other. It was unnatural. She's lying. Everyone knows she's lying, but it doesn't matter. Because the king wants Anne Boleyn gone. And to destroy Anne, he needs to destroy her family. George is not the target. He's the weapon. The message to anyone who might defend the Queen. Even her own blood will burn. Here's what makes this especially sinister. The charges are not meant to be believed. They're meant to humiliate. To strip George Boleyn of everything that makes him who he is. His honor, his reputation, his name. The Tudor court operates on appearance, on performance, on the carefully maintained illusion of virtue. To accuse a nobleman of incest is to erase him socially before you erase him physically. George Boleyn is taken to the Tower, not to the royal apartments where high-ranking prisoners usually go, to a common cell, a stone box with no furniture, no heat, no light except what filters through a barred window the size of a fist. He's stripped of his fine clothes, given a rough woolen tunic, his rings are taken, his chains of office, his sword, everything that marks him as Lord Rochford is removed. Within hours, he's just another prisoner, nameless, powerless, waiting. Think about what this does psychologically. George Boleyn has spent his entire life building an identity. He's the son of Thomas Boleyn, the brother of the Queen, a man who speaks 5 languages, who writes poetry that circulates at court, who negotiates with foreign ambassadors, who dines with kings. Now he's sitting on a stone floor in the dark, wearing rags, listening to rats scratching in the walls. And he knows why he's here. Not because he's guilty, because his sister refused to give the king a son. May 12th, 1536. 10 days after his arrest, George is brought before a jury, not a regular jury, a jury of his peers Chabanile. 26 noblemen, men he knows, men he's feasted with, gambled with, laughed with, men who owe their positions to Boleyn patronage. They sit in judgment, and they won't meet his eyes. The charges are read again. Treason, conspiracy, incest. The prosecution presents no physical evidence, no letters, no witnesses besides his wife, just accusations. And one piece of testimony so damning it seals his fate. A servant claims that on multiple occasions, George Boleyn spent more than an hour alone in the Queen's chambers. Alone, with his sister, behind a closed door. In Tudor England, this is enough, because the appearance of impropriety is as damning as the act itself. And George knows it. Here's what the trial records show. George Boleyn defends himself brilliantly. He speaks for over 2 hours. Calmly, logically. He dismantles every accusation. He points out the lack of evidence. He challenges his wife's testimony, noting her known resentment. He reminds the jury that he has served the king faithfully for over a decade. He's eloquent, persuasive, compelling, and it doesn't matter, because the verdict was decided before the trial began. Guilty. On all charges. The sentence: death by beheading, to be carried out within 5 days. Think about what this means. George Boleyn just proved his innocence to a room full of men who convicted him anyway. He's not being executed for what he did. He's being executed for who he is. A Boleyn, a threat, a loose end in Henry VIII's plan to erase his second marriage and move on to Jane Seymour. And now, he has 5 days to wait. 5 days to sit in his cell knowing that his brilliance, his education, his entire life has been reduced to nothing. 5 days to understand that the machine doesn't care about truth. It only cares about power. If this moment doesn't move you to learn more, you might be missing the lesson. Subscribe to keep these voices alive. Now let's see what happens in those final 5 days. May 13th, 1536. 4 days before his execution. George Boleyn is allowed one visitor. A priest, not the royal chaplain, not a confessor he knows, a stranger. A man sent by Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister, to extract a final confession. The priest sits across from George in the cell. He's polite, gentle. He offers spiritual comfort, absolution, peace. All George has to do is confess, admit to the crimes, acknowledge his sins, ask God's forgiveness. And perhaps the priest suggests the king might show mercy, commute the sentence, exile instead of execution. A lie. They both know it, but the priest waits, hoping George will break. Here's what George Boleyn understands. A confession would give Henry VIII what he wants. Legitimacy. Proof that Anne Boleyn's marriage was invalid. That her daughter, Princess Elizabeth, is a bastard. That the king was right to annul the marriage and move on. George's confession would erase his sister from history. It would destroy everything the Boleyns built. It would make their deaths mean nothing. So he refuses. He tells the priest, "I will not confess to crimes I did not commit. I will not dishonor my sister's name. I will die as I lived, a loyal servant of the king and a faithful brother." The priest leaves, empty-handed. And Cromwell, reading the report later that night, makes a note in the margin. Obstinate, unrepentant. Proceed as planned. May 15th, 1536. 2 days before his execution. George is moved to a different cell. This one has a window, not a small barred opening, a real window, with a view of Tower Hill, the execution site. From his new cell, George can see the scaffold being built. He can hear the hammers, the shouts of the carpenters, the thud of wood on wood. He watches them construct the platform, test the block, sharpen the axe. They are building the stage for his death, in full view, and they want him to watch. This is not an accident. This is psychological warfare. The Tower authorities, under Cromwell's orders, have placed George where he can see his own execution being prepared. Hour by hour, plank by plank, they want him to think about it, to imagine it, to feel the fear build until it consumes him, until he begs for mercy, until he confesses. But George doesn't beg. According to the Tower records, he spends those 2 days writing letters to his father, to his friends, to his sister, though that letter will never reach her. She's in her own cell, waiting for her own execution. He writes poetry. One poem survives, copied by a sympathetic guard. It's about innocence, about justice, about dying with honor in a world that has none. The last stanza reads, "Though men may lie and crowns may fall, the truth remains when all is gone. My name will fade, my body fall, but not the love I built upon." Think about the strength that takes to watch your execution being prepared, to know you have 2 days left, and to spend those days not weeping, not raging, but writing poetry, affirming your innocence, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing you broken. This is defiance in its purest form, and it terrifies Cromwell, because if George Boleyn dies with dignity, he becomes a martyr, and martyrs are dangerous. May 17th, 1536, the morning of his execution. George is woken before dawn. He's given a final meal. Bread, weak ale he doesn't eat. He's allowed to wash it, to change into clean clothes, a black doublet, white shirt, the closest thing to nobleman's attire they'll allow him. At 8 a.m., the guards come for him. They bind his hands, not in front like before, behind his back, tight enough that the rope cuts into his wrists, and they lead him out of the cell, through the corridors, past other prisoners who press their faces to the bars to watch, out into the courtyard, into the cold morning air. And there, waiting, is the crowd. Here's what most people don't know. Tower Hill executions are public, open to anyone who wants to attend. And for George Boleyn's execution, thousands have come, not to mourn, to watch, to see a Boleyn deed, to witness the fall of a family that rose too high. The crowd is massive, restless, excited. This is entertainment. George is led up onto the scaffold. The platform is 15 feet high, wide enough for the executioner, the block, a few witnesses, and the condemned. The wood is new. It still smells of sawdust. George looks out at the crowd, at the faces. Some he recognizes. Courtiers, merchants, men who once bowed when he passed. Now they're here to watch him die. And he has to speak. It's tradition. The condemned gives a final speech. Usually, they praise the king, ask for forgiveness, proclaim their guilt, beg for mercy for their families. George Boleyn does none of that. He stands at the edge of the scaffold, hands bound behind his back, and he speaks. His voice is steady, clear, loud enough to carry across the crowd. He says, "I am come here to die. I will not accuse anyone. I will not confess to crimes I did not commit. I ask only that you pray for my soul and remember that justice, though delayed, will one day be done." Then he kneels, places his head on the block. The wood is cold against his neck. He closes his eyes, and he waits. The executioner raises the axe. It's a heavy blade, sharpened that morning, designed for a clean cut. One stroke. If the executioner is skilled, if the condemned stays still, George Boleyn doesn't move. The axe falls. The crowd roars. Here's what should haunt you. George Boleyn's execution took less than 5 minutes, but his destruction took 15 days. From the moment of his arrest to the moment the blade fell, the Tudor machine systematically stripped him of everything: his title, his wealth, his reputation, his dignity, his name. They accused him of incest with his sister. They paraded him before a jury of men who betrayed him. They forced him to watch his own execution being built. They offered him false hope of mercy if he'd confess. And when he refused, when he walked to the scaffold still claiming his innocence, they killed him anyway. Not because he was guilty, because he was inconvenient, because his sister had failed to give the king a son, because the Boleyns had to be erased so Henry VIII could marry again. If this exposed something history tried to bury, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next investigation. Now let's confront the aftermath. 2 days later, on May 19th, 1536, Anne Boleyn is executed on Tower Green. She dies with the same dignity as her brother, proclaiming her innocence, refusing to confess. The Boleyn family is destroyed. Their estates are seized, their titles revoked. Their name becomes synonymous with treason. And George Boleyn, the poet, the diplomat, the man who spoke 5 languages and negotiated with kings, is reduced to a footnote. The Queen's brother who died for incest. Ali, repeated so many times it became history. But here's what the Tudor court didn't anticipate. George Boleyn's refusal to break became its own kind of victory. He didn't give them the confession they wanted. He didn't legitimize their accusations. He died as he lived, defending his sister, maintaining his honor, proving that even in the face of absolute power, the human spirit can remain unbroken. The machine destroyed his body. It destroyed his reputation. It destroyed his family. But it didn't destroy him. Because 300 years later, historians would find his letters, his poetry, the testimony of the guards who watched him in those final days, and they would piece together the truth. That George Boleyn was innocent, that the charges were fabricated, that his execution was murder dressed up as justice. Here's what should terrify you about this story. The machine didn't fail. It worked perfectly. George Boleyn died. Anne Boleyn died. The Boleyns were erased from power. Henry VIII married Jane Seymour 11 days after Anne's execution. The court moved on. The system continued. And for centuries no one questioned it. The question isn't whether George Boleyn was guilty. We know he wasn't. The question is, how many other innocent people were fed into machines like this, their names erased, their stories buried, their suffering forgotten? And what does it say about power that the Tudor court could destroy an entire family, in public, with fabricated charges, and face no consequences? Think about that. A man who defended himself brilliantly, who maintained his innocence to the end, who wrote poetry in his final days, who refused to break even when they built his execution scaffold in front of his window. He died anyway, not because the system failed, because the system was designed to consume people exactly like him, and it's still there, in the archives, in the records, waiting to teach us what happens when power decides someone is inconvenient.